Welcome to Life Group. We're glad that you're with us. During this season, we're looking at some of the stories of Jesus, the parables that he told, the parables that offer us a great truth. This session, we're going to look at Matthew 13, one of the important parables of Jesus, where he talks about judgment, but about more than just judgment. To help us think about that parable, here's what I want you to do. Imagine with me for just a minute that you're driving down the interstate, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, somebody swerves into your lane right in front of you. What do? You maybe swerve a little bit, you honk the horn, you flash the lights, you yell at them through your windshield. Maybe you offer them some kind of gesture. What do you think about that person? You're probably going to think, well, they're rude, they're arrogant, they don't care about other human life. The person who cut you off, you may think is flawed, a miserable excuse for a human being, right? So let's think about that again. Imagine again that you're driving down the interstate, you're listening to your favorite radio or maybe a podcast, and as you're listening, you realize suddenly that you need to exit the interstate, and not just in a mile or half a mile, you need to exit the interstate right now. So immediately you jerk into the other lane, and you realize almost instantly that you didn't check your blind spot, and you pulled right in front of someone else who's honking their horn, they're flashing their lights at you. You can see in the window that they're yelling at you through the windshield. What do you think about yourself in that moment? Do you think that you're a miserable, flawed human being? Do you think that you're rude or arrogant? No, you're just someone who made a mistake in a moment because of the circumstance. What we have there between the two different instances is what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. It's when we basically attribute to someone else motive that they are evil, not dictated by circumstance, but that their very being is bad. We do that all the time. We do that with people who disagree with us about politics or religion. We do that with people who maybe have hurt us or disappointed us. We attribute to them a fundamental understanding of their being, that they are just wrong, that they are evil, or they are bad people. We don't think about their circumstances. And the truth is always a bit more complicated than what we instantly think. And that's what our parable is about in Matthew 13. In this story that Jesus offers to his disciples, he does what he does with every story. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like this. In other words, he's describing what the kingdom of heaven is like, what it would be like if we were living fully in the presence of God. And in this story, what he does is he talks a little bit about judgment, but more than that, he talks about how people are different, how different people are called to live together. We call this parable in Matthew 13 that starts in verse 24, the parable of the wheat and the tares. And it goes like this. A farmer went out to scatter seeds, to plant wheat. And then we hear that his enemy comes out behind him and plants weeds right behind him. The servants of the farmer don't recognize this until late in the growing season, because the type of weeds looks exactly like the wheat. And so they go to the farmer and they tell the farmer, look, there's weeds growing in with the wheat. The farmer instantly knows what's wrong. An enemy has done this. So the servants say, well, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to go through and pull up all of the tares, all of the weeds? And the farmer wisely said this, don't do that. I'll sort it out later. Because if you go in and pull up the weeds, you might damage the wheat as well. You may not know what you're doing, how to pull it out. I'll handle it on my own. The parable that Jesus is giving us isn't just a parable of final judgment. It's a parable of how we live in the world with people who are different, with people who may think and believe differently than us, people who may do bad things, people who may disappoint us, people who may do things that we don't believe in. We see people all around us, and we do this a lot right now around politics. We see people who support our President Trump, and we think a certain thing about them. Or we see people who support Biden, and we think a certain thing about them. Or we see people who support Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, and we assume certain things about the core of their being. And we want to solve it, so we fight and we push and we try to explain it to people why they're wrong, and we yell about things. All the time, Jesus is saying the kingdom of God is a place where God will sort everything in the end. That's not our task. That's not our call. That's not our responsibility, because we can't see the end of all things. We can't see the circumstances people come from. We can't see the trajectory that God has people on. What we're called to do is to patiently reveal grace. Now, that doesn't mean that we ignore all the evil in the world or we ignore all the bad in the world. Jesus talks about that in other places. But maybe what Jesus is trying to get us to understand is that in the kingdom of God, our very first move is patient trust. Patiently offering grace, patiently trusting that God will work things out, that God is the one in control. We see that even in the life of Jesus. Remember at the Last Supper, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. Judas was there with him, Judas who had betrayed Jesus. And yet Jesus didn't try to rip Judas out of the disciples. Peter was there, Peter who would deny Jesus in just a few hours. Jesus didn't try to get rid of Peter. Jesus knew that all the disciples would flee from him, but he didn't try to expel them because of that. He saw more in them. He saw more in the situation than what you or I would see. So maybe the questions that you can discuss tonight are simply these. What would it mean in this world today to begin by erring on the side of grace? And what might it mean to truly trust God with others who may disagree with us, others who may have disappointed us? Talk about those questions with your group.